Africa is my first time. Thanks, yeah. Yeah, thank you for having me. I like walking around, so I'm gonna wander a little bit, step a little bit. Cool. So, my name's Jack. I founded a company called Strike, and we're launching some new products today. 2 new products today. Super, super exciting, and have a lot to do with Africa, obviously. I think, though, to understand the impact and quality and depth of what we think we've achieved today in partnerships with a lot of people in this room is to first understand, there we go. To understand what payment rails are and the history of payment rails and where they started and where we are today, especially today with the products and announcements we're making. So, payment rails, firstly, just defining them. Super, super simple, but sometimes people really overcomplicate them. It really just guarantees the transfer of value from point A to point B and settles that value, right? So the very first payment rail of all time in human history was our hand. It worked really, really well and still does to this day, right? So you have Alice that wants to transfer value through a payment rail to Bob, and you just hand the coin. And it's amazing. There are no fees, there's no interchange, you don't have to wait a lot of time, right? And there's a super important quality that comes with these payments is there's this term I use all the time. They're cash final, which is super, super important. Cash final just implies that you're actually settling a physical thing in real time. So there's no concept of chargeback or no debt or no credit. And so for a very, very long time, far longer than payment rails we use today, people just handed bearer instruments in a cash final manner to trade and transact. So here are just the general qualities and properties of our hands. So just being able to hand people coins. Super, super valuable, especially a long time ago. Super important, arguably still to this day, the best way to transact money given that it's an option for you. Eventually, humanity developed a little bit and our demands for payments changed slightly, but in a really important way, where after the Industrial Revolution, Alice all of a sudden wanted railroads and factories and all sorts of really crazy shit. And Bob was like, what? I'm your neighbor. I sell you goats. I can't help you build a factory. You have to go to someone all the way on the other side of town to source materials to build a railroad or to build a factory or to build an industrial machine. And that was when humanity invented a check, which is a really, really important concept, where it used to be called promissory notes, which was just a promise that I'll pay you later. Because all of a sudden, Alice having to wheelbarrow coins all over the place wasn't good enough, right? Bob sold goats. Alice couldn't just simply buy all of the materials post-industrial revolution from Bob. Transacting had to require a ton more distance, and it had to require a ton more size. People were making really far payments with a lot of money. And so we created these debt instruments, which is a super, super, super important difference than being able to hand someone actual money. If you notice here, the hand, if I go back really quickly, being able to hand someone money, the payment rail that is your bare hand, there was no cost to use it, and it settled instantly because it was cash final. The problem, though, that Alice ran into after the Industrial Revolution is she couldn't make a really far payment, and she can only make the payment as much as she can carry coins, right? And if you go back to the introduction of debt and these promissory notes, these checks, we kind of flipped it around, where now Alice can pay anyone in town to build a railroad, and Alice can write a check of any size. You're literally just writing a number on a piece of paper. But it became really, really expensive and really, really slow, and it implied a sense of creditworthiness, and it implied a sense of debt. And actually, since checks were invented, that's how payments work all the way up until today. I think this quote is hilarious. The founder of WorldPay, which is one of the biggest payment processors on planet Earth, everyone knows that association with physical currency, actually being able to hand someone something, is far easier than the digital banking rails we use today. So all the way from the invention of checks around the end of the Industrial Revolution to today, we've swapped out the ability to do instant free cash final settlement for implied credit and debt, just so that we can achieve distance payments and large size payments. So just like everyone is familiar with all of these, you've got real-time banking payments, you've got ACH payments, you've got wire transfer payments. They all have like different costs and different time associated, but they're all backed along the same concept of the promissory note that was created to kind of scale our ability to hand each other coins. And so the way it works today, which is relevant today, is now Alice and Bob, instead of handing each other coins or even handing each other checks, to be totally honest with you, they go through each other's banks. And these banks now use those rails like a wire or like an ACH to settle debt between each other. However, instead of clearing coins at the pub, which used to be how, I wish they still did this today. That would be so lit. I would love going to the bar to settle my promissory notes to see who owes me money. They don't do this anymore. Now money actually lives at the central bank. So a little bit of history. We went from handing each other coins to needing to introduce debt to scale payments. And today, it still works the same, is that Alice's bank, Bob's bank, they exchange debt between each other. And then the central bank of that currency, ever so frequently, depending on the debt rails you use, clears the debt and actually moves the money. Money never actually moves until the central bank touches it. And these systems work decently well. I talk a lot of shit about Visa, but they work decently well, as long as everyone is moving the same instrument on the same network with the same amount of access. So what I mean by that is, in the United States of America, Chase Bank and Citibank are really popular US banks for the United States dollar. And the Federal Reserve is my central bank. And so these systems work okay. I can accept payroll from my employer, or I can send an ACH payment to another small business, and the Federal Reserve will clear that debt and settle that payment on a reasonable basis, right? However, who is the world central bank? Who's the central bank of the central banks, which is a really important point, right? So if we're all using the US dollar, these systems are okay. If we're all using the Nigerian naira, these systems are potentially okay. If we're all using the euro or the British pound, these systems are okay. But who banks the central banks? If the central banks have debt and payments within each other, who clears that payment? Is like a really interesting and important concept, right? So if we have Chase and Citibank and we have the Federal Reserve as the central bank that clears this payment, what if we had the Bank of England and the Federal Reserve? What if Alice lived in the UK and Bob lived in the United States and they need to transact? Which, by the way, is like a really frequent thing. It's called a cross-border payment. This happens all the time at an extreme scale. So who is the central bank of the central bank that clears that? And the answer today, like very actively, is nobody. Cross-border payments are a huge problem, right? Like today's systems only work if everyone is using the same currency on the same network with the same access. So if I'm in the UK and I need to send money to the US or vice versa, we're not using the same currency, we're not using the same network, and we don't have the same access. So cross-border payments is a really, really unsolved problem. And so clearing, again, between these different currencies, there's no central global authority in the world that can clear everyone's debt. There's no world global currency and global authority that clears for the central banks themselves. We're just extrapolating these problems. This is I would describe it as a mild issue in the United States of America and in the UK. It's slightly painful, it's left room for businesses like TransferWise to build a company the size of like $10 billion. So there's obviously efficiencies to deliver in the market, and there are problems that people are solving, but I would describe it as mild. How it impacts emerging markets and markets with lesser developed currencies is extremely significant. So just for context, how this has impacted Africa, and I've had the absolute pleasure to learn from a lot of the businesses in this room. So first of all, Africa has 55 currencies and 41 central banks. That's 40 more central banks than I have to deal with. I'm from the United States, I have one. And so Africa has 41. So if you think that central banks have no central authority to clear amongst each other, 41 is a lot of central banks to try and be able to clear each other's debt and settle payments amongst each other, right? The result of this, very unfortunately, is that 80% of African cross-border payment transactions are routed and cleared offshore, not in the continent. They actually predominantly are cleared in the United States of America against the US dollar. So again, if you are using the same currency on the same network with the same access, it could be a lot better, but it's not the worst thing in the world. If you have 55 currencies and 41 central banks, you have a huge problem. You have a massive, massive problem, which is being realized in the continent of Africa. So here's just a few real news publications to try and get a material understanding. So Ghana, which is obviously very relevant to this conference, there's such a dollar shortage in the entire continent of Africa, they're actually going to start buying their oil with gold because their central bank is effectively out of United States dollars. Airlines collectively have pretty close to $1 billion of money stuck in the continent of Africa, and a lot of them particularly in Nigeria, because they cannot get the money out. And businesses like TransferWise actually have ceased to operate in markets within Africa like Nigeria because of these really, really pained problems. And I even wanted to source the IMF. I'm not quoting Bitcoin magazine here, so I'm not acting with an extreme level of bias. This is the International Monetary Fund, which openly does not like Bitcoin. And these are some direct quotes. Making payments from one African country to another isn't easy. It took 2 weeks for the guy to receive the money. The cost of a $100 transaction was $40. So I'm not that good at math, but that's 40%. That's a ton of money. And in 2017, this is all from the IMF, 12% of intra-Africa payments. So a payment, let's say, from Nigeria to South Africa, Nigerian Naira to South African Rand. We're done in the continent. Just less than 90% of payments inside of this continent had to be cleared and settled in another currency in another central bank. This is predominantly done in Europe, and like I said before, mostly done in North America, and where I'm from in particular, the United States. The World Bank estimates that even the active subpar solution that is trying to be deployed inside of the continent, the African Continental Free Trade Area, this agreement, they think will raise 50 million people out of extreme poverty. So it's again, I'm trying to, the best I can, communicate how severe this problem is, especially if you're listening to this live stream and you're from where I'm from. It is a mild frustration. If you have 41 central banks and 55 currencies in your continent, it's a really, really, really big problem that's excluding international business, that's driving intra-continent currency transfer offshore. You're losing jobs. Businesses are ceasing to operate in this continent and in your countries, which is losing jobs and losing just sweat equity of the people in this continent. And so, okay, sorry, a lot of context. What if there was a payment rail for the world? Theoretically, what would it look like? What would we need to build? How would it function? So one, it would have to be global, obviously, because it's for planet Earth. Two, it would have to be openly accessible to every single person. It would have, like the Federal Reserve is not openly accessible to everyone, right? It would have to be cash final settlement. No debt, no credit. The fact, even when I spend out of my checking account, it implies a sense of creditworthiness, because ever since we invented checks, you're dealing with debt. It doesn't matter if you're spending out of a checking account, a savings account, your credit card. Cash final settlement fixes that. No fraud, no chargebacks. Settlement has to be instant. Settlement theoretically should be free or as close to free as possible. If it was digital, that would solve the problem our hand couldn't solve, and we could send it anywhere in the world. And if the value was universal, not biased to a particular geography, not the US dollar, because the US dollar is operated solely by the United States of America and the Federal Reserve, not the British pound, because that's by the Bank of England, right? It would have to be universal value that everyone has access to, instant settlement, cash final, no debt, no credit. It would be the equivalent, I'm 5'8", so my arm is long enough, but it would be the equivalent if I could reach from Chicago to Nigeria and hand someone a physical coin. Obviously, that was a constraint, and that's why we invented debt and credit and payments, but it would be the equivalent in a digital form. So this is obviously not a new idea to a lot of people in this room, but maybe to a lot of people in the world, is what if Bitcoin, hear me out for everyone on live stream, everyone at the IMF, hear me out for a second. What if Bitcoin acted as the world's central bank? And I mean that not as a threat to the dollar, like you can hold and use whatever you want. I mean that as the most liquid, globally transferable asset that could clear everyone's payments. What if instead, if I wanted to send pounds to the United States, or if I wanted to send Naira to the United States, what if Bitcoin as a global network cleared that, and Bitcoin acted as the central bank of the central banks? Right, and if we look at these metrics and properties, we're not really sacrificing on anything. The cost to use Bitcoin is free. It's pretty cool. You can download it for free on the internet. It's open source software. It is instant with protocols like the Lightning Network, anywhere in the world because it's digital, and you can transact in any size. So you're not making any trade-offs. You don't have to make this trade-off between handing someone a physical coin and using a promissory note that implies debt, right? And obviously, this doesn't need many words. This is just very painfully obvious. So we got the Bank of England, the Fed, Bob, Alice. And we're going to walk through, like, what if this was Bitcoin and Lightning? And obviously, the GBP and the US dollar, they're very privileged. They're okay. We're going to swap this out for Naira. First, if we're using Bitcoin and Lightning, we don't need debt rails anymore. So if we're not using a physical digital bearer instrument, we need debt rails. If we're going to use Bitcoin and Lightning, we can remove those. Next, we don't need banks. Because if everyone has access to Bitcoin and Lightning, then we don't need banks to actually settle these payments and interface with real people. Anybody can use Bitcoin and Lightning. So I'm a big fan of a company called Bitnob that we partnered with to launch these products. And we could just, yeah. So people in the continent of Africa don't need a banking charter, don't need a special access window at the Federal Reserve. You could be an extremely passionate entrepreneur that cares deeply about your people and your continent and work your ass off to build really cool APIs and really cool services, because everybody has access to the Bitcoin as the world central bank that clears our money. And then we obviously operate in the United States of America. So what would this look like? I've got a demo that's live now. It launched about 15 minutes ago that I hope plays. Oh, here we go. So what you're now seeing is a normal fintech app. Could be any app. Could be the Cash App. I see some Square guys back there. This is Strike. You enter the country you want to send to, you enter their phone number, you enter their bank and the account number, and that's it. It feels like a wire transfer, and you're not touching Bitcoin. I'm sending US dollars. I'll explain the Bitcoin part in a second. But if I wanted to send to a Nigerian bank account, which TransferWise can no longer do, 10 US dollars, I get my confirmation screen and my exchange rate. I click send. That screen, for those in the back that can't see, that says your money will be in a Nigerian bank in 1 minute. Which, it's a, yeah. It's the craziest thing of all time. It feels like Venmo. It feels like a Venmo payment. It's really remarkable. And so let's quickly walk through how that happened, because I know people are probably a little confused. Like, did he send Bitcoin? How is Bitcoin involved? I thought it was dollars. I thought it was Bitcoin. So we'll walk through it. So Bob, which is a US person, Bob could love Bitcoin. Bob could fucking hate Bitcoin. It really is not super relevant right now. Bob wants to send $10. So Bob downloads Strike. And this is live today. You can update your apps. You can send money into a Nigerian bank account right now. And so we at Strike megaphone to Bernard and Bitnob. They say, yo, Bitnob, I got a customer that needs to send $10 to Nigeria. Do you speak Bitcoin and Lightning, right? So I'm dealing in US dollars, which have the Federal Reserve. You guys, I need it to get to Naira, the Nigerian central bank. How are we going to do that? Do you speak Bitcoin and Lightning? And Bitnob, very Chad, just says, yes, we do. We say, okay, amazing. I'll be sending over $10, which you don't necessarily understand. That's 0.0005 Bitcoin. Do you copy? Can you get this into a Nigerian bank account if I send it over this payment rail? And Bitnob says, yes, of course we can. In fact, if you send us that 0.0005 Bitcoin within the next 100 seconds, we will put 7,031 Naira in the Nigerian bank account. Do you copy? I say, yes, I absolutely copy. I take the dollars from Bob. Without Bob knowing, I send the Bitcoin over Lightning to Bitnob. They're able to receive this physical cash final bearer instrument and put the money in Alice's account. And so to the customers, it's actually this like remarkably delightful experience. It feels like a P2P payment. It's instant. There's no debt. There's no credit. There's no delays. We just achieved dollars to Naira, Nairas to dollars, which is this is an experience, especially speaking on the ground people in Africa, that is absolutely unheard of. Like, my favorite question when I talk to people is like, who set the FX rate? And if you Google the actual FX rate, so our customer got 7,031 Naira. The actual rate, according to Google and according to the FX, would have been 4,445 Naira. So the rate that we got was actually 60% better than the traditional Forex market rate. And you'd be like, how? Who set that rate? Did the Fed set that rate? No, Bitcoin set that rate. The way to actually think about how we're achieving Forex if we clear through Bitcoin is I have dollars. It's how many Bitcoin can I get for my dollars, and then how many Naira can I get for my Bitcoin. If I'm sending Naira to the United States, it's how many Bitcoin can I get for my Naira, and then how many dollars can I get for that Bitcoin. And actually, when you deploy this into production and you don't listen to talking heads out in the real world, you actually achieve far better FX rates in the real world, which is absolutely insane. And so in this user story, Bitcoin actually is acting like the world's reserve currency. It's acting as the most liquid, accessible global instrument for us to clear and settle value amongst each other. If you want to send dollars to Naira, we can actually use Bitcoin behind the hood to clear that value. And if you look at it as a payment rail for the world, it actually checks all these boxes. It's globally accessible. So the dollar shortage here in Africa, there's no Bitcoin shortage. The Bitcoin central bank has no bias. There's no such thing, right? Bitcoin is accessible to everyone. It's cash final, it's physical, it's bearer, it's digital. It's amazing. And so the last thing that we've done in Africa, so we also have a B2B product. So all of these businesses that cease to exist now, we're working with them. And we're helping them get their money out of Africa and into the United States, right? This is a client of ours, a customer of ours, which didn't want to be quoted for complicated reasons directly, but it's all of these businesses' biggest expense. It's 10 to 40% of your money. So if you have $100 worth of Naira in Nigeria, you actually have at best 90, but probably closer to $60 worth practically. And we're actually able to get this money out, right? Because as long as you can get Bitcoin, you can get dollars. You're always one Lightning payment away from us being able to swap. If you have Naira here, all you got to do is get Bitcoin, and then you can send me a Lightning payment, and I'll put dollars in whatever Chase bank account you got, right? And so instead of this, we have this. So we're able to do millions of dollars of transfers. So not only helping consumers, but helping businesses, helping get jobs back here, helping international companies start back up and run in countries like Nigeria, and get liquidity back into the country. And so all this is live now. The last thing, yeah. So, yeah. We've made a ton of noise. I know Chipper Cash is watching. Chipper Cash is an amazing business that specializes in intra-Africa payments. They have 5 million customers, I believe, here in Africa. They're a customer. They wanted a shout out, so I told them I got them. They want everyone to know that they're pro-Bitcoin, pro-Lightning, and that they see this as the world summit layer. So the last thing before I hop off, I'm probably way over time, I always do, is I need to bring Bernard from Bitnob up here. It's the coolest thing in the world, man. It's the concept of Bitcoin as a network. I got to be able to pay someone's Lightning invoice, right? Like, I have to be able to send. I can take a customer's dollars and I can send a Bitcoin payment, but send a Bitcoin payment to who? The TransferWise network has one participant. It's TransferWise, right? The Swift network has limited participants at central banks. Bernard and Bitnob is the whole reason we're able to settle value in other currencies and in other continents, because they're on Lightning too. So it's a network. Open networks win. And I told him, I was like, how do you want to do the announcement for this conference? He said, you got to do it. I said, I'm not doing it without you getting up here with me, man. It doesn't feel right. So I don't know if you want anything to say, but it's an open network, and it's inspiring to be able to connect with people all over the world over an open protocol and build innovative products that a central bank has no chance of building what we just built. We did it in a month, and how old are you?
Yeah, so like I said yesterday, with Bitcoin, it's like we work for each other, right? Like, this eliminates the concept of correspondent banking, right? And again, this saves us a lot of money. It means that right now, somebody can send money from the US to Nigeria, and it actually settles, and they don't have to actually touch Bitcoin themselves. So if anyone tells you, oh, it's volatile, it's this and that, like, that's in the past, right? If businesses in Africa can't send their monies out and it's stopping them from coming to do business in Africa, then it's bad for us. But if they can come do business and they have the assurance that there's a payments rail that actually sends their money back to places like the US, then it improves commerce and trade for us. And for us at Bitnob, that's something we're really trying to keep on solving. Great to work with you, my friend.
Yes. So if you're in the United States and you need to get money to Africa, you could use Strike. It'll get there in 1 minute. It'll get there it's cheaper, faster than anything you've ever seen. There's actually no other American company that can get money into Nigeria, so we're proud to be the only one right now. Let's fucking go. And if you're a business, call Bernard, call me. If you have money stuck in this continent, if you need more efficient ways, if you don't want to pay 40%, I'll tell you what, to the chipper cashes in the world, I don't charge 40%. I could charge a lot cheaper than that. So if you need to get money out of this country, if you need access to United States dollars, let us know. And thank you guys. Appreciate it.